Greetings, Alex Alien Nerd here, and I realized partway through editing my video on Series 1 of the Sarahjane Adventures that my videos on Doctor Who are framed in such a way where you'd have to see the new show, which is the one from 2005 onwards, to understand a lot of what kinds of topics I keep bringing up, which is a bit of a problem when one of them is literally where to start with classic Doctor Who. I decided that what would be best would be to go through a lot of what to expect from the show and stuff like that to literally any newcomer, so you can just jump in anywhere to take a look and see if it's for you. To start with, while Who has changed a lot in the 60-something years since its inception, I'll go over it in broad strokes, like what to expect as the formula for all of it. Trust me, this is going somewhere. The Twilight Zone is my favourite sci-fi show from the 60s. At least everything but Series 4. For those that haven't seen it, it has a random selection of characters, bump into something alien, they time travel, a few times it's supernatural, but which Who doesn't dive into often. Sometimes it's scary, other times it's the silliest things. Doctor Who mostly takes that, and instead of bad characters having karmic punishments or horrifying sci-fi concepts happening to them, a man with no name figure comes in from somewhere and solves what's going on. I hope I don't have to explain the man with no name figure, but just in case, this is Yojimbo, a Japanese movie from 1961 about a mysterious Ronin who says something absurd whenever anyone asks him his name, who wanders into a town in feudal Japan to stop a gang war pretty much single-handed by outsmarting them and making them look like idiots, while having them believe he's on both their sides. This character also got a sequel called Sanjiro, which, if you're an anime fan, is where the super fast sword slicing people thing comes from. And speaking of anime, the character was also the basis for the Vampire Hunter D novels and anime, which is the same concept, but with post-apocalyptic vampires. Later, the movie got remade, Yojimbo, as a fistful of dollars and popularized this nameless figure that just shows up and does good to a Western audience. While there are differences between this archetype and the Doctor, the title of Doctor Who actually came from this exchange in the second ever episode when it was still something risky. The character is not called Doctor Who.
Just open the doors, Dr. Foreman.
Eh? Doctor Who?
The difference is that Yojimbo and the Man with No Name are pretty flippant about murdering people, whereas the Doctor likes to preach pacifism. They probably killed more people than every historical figure they've name-dropped combined, but with their version of pacifism, it's pretty much that if there really is no other option, if their back really is against the wall, if they can't resolve this in any other way, they kill. There is a further step to this that I'll talk about later, but now I'm just talking differences. There is also the license the writers use for outsmarting their opponents. One of the reasons why I'm a casual comic book reader at best, at least for the stuff that's meant to go on indefinitely, is that while there are good stories in Batman, Spider-Man, or whatever, is that the writers do stuff that's heavily contradictory for the sake of the story. For example, I read in one issue that the Flash can't save 2 children from a burning building while saving everyone else, and gets smoke detectors for everyone in the town and scolds other people for having flat batteries as a coping for that survivors guild, and has to be told he can't save everyone by the members of the Justice League. The issue with this is that the Flash can run so fast it can go back in time and break reality. It's very inconsistent based on what the writer feels like doing with the characters, and I get it. That's part of the medium. When these characters are so ongoing, there are only so many ways that this character can still be interesting while doing that to their abilities. But what that also means is how intelligent Batman is, for instance, is solely dependent on the writer. The Doctor's intelligence is very much in that same boat. In one episode, they're not smart by Time Lord standards, they're just really intelligent by our own. In another, they're able to outsmart all of them at once. Otherwise, they're aloof, and they have a curious nature about wherever they visit, making them dive headfirst into trouble just as much as it does have them learn about the secrets of the universe. Actually, the jury's probably more in favour of it gets the Doctor into trouble than the Doctor learning about the universe. whether they actually know all the secrets or not. Again, depends on the writer. Usually they have a TARDIS. They call it a ship in early Classic Who, but TARDIS is from episode 1 and is an acronym for time and relative dimensions in space. If anyone speaks in other language, one of the things that doesn't make sense openly is that no matter where you are, the acronym doesn't seem to change despite those words likely not starting with those letters, let alone if your language has a different alphabet. I don't know why, but I imagine it must be confusing if you're not part of an English-speaking country. Yeah. I should also get something out of the way, and that is the extreme personality changes the Doctor goes through with changing actor. One of the reasons I guess it had its longevity is that the first Doctor is actually an old man that's a little short with the people he's travelling with, depending on what's going on, and openly condescends them for being human because of how wide the intelligence gap is between him and the people he's talking to. He does have the desire to do good when and where he sees the need to, and he slowly does appreciate humans over his time in the TARDIS, but this is a side of the Doctor which is very rarely seen in other versions, and what I mean is that with every new actor that plays the character, for the most part there's a new aspect of the character to explore, at least for the first 20 or so years of Classic Who. After the fifth Doctor decides to be grounded in humanity in a way that the previous ones simply weren't, they do the first Doctor again but make him more theatrical and younger, and the second but make him a chess master that's happy to throw anything under the bus for a win. What this means is that when checking out Doctor Who, you're simply looking at one aspect of the character when watching one story. Otherwise, they also have something of an ego. How much of an ego, again, changes depending on which one you're watching, and the interpretation I get from them not saying everything, which is a constant, is that they've been around for so long, no matter which version you're looking at, that the people he's talking to can die of old age before they finish explaining, and going off on adventures is usually more fun. The other thing worth talking about when it comes to the Doctor's personality is multi-Doctor stories. In every single multi-Doctor story to ever exist, or one that references previous Doctors, they are pretty flippant about seeing their own versions as the definitive versions. More of an ego thing. The 13th Doctor saying she had an upgrade in the episode Spyfall was extremely controversial among people who don't understand this concept. Well, I don't really expect a version of the Doctor to go full sexism a woman when meeting the Whittaker version. Time Lords don't have our biases. The best way I can describe how this is supposed to work is to look back on the younger, cringier parts of your life. Like, think of yourself at 13. Now imagine meeting that version of yourself plucked out of time, and that version sees you in the exact same way as you see them. That's the Doctor meeting their other selves. Over the course of these stories, they gain respect for each other, even if they still have this subconscious I see myself as the best version thing going on. I mostly see this as a reflection of the fanbase because before Tom Baker came along, the most popular opinion was that you can't beat the original.
Since then, there's been 3 Doctor Who's, including John Pertwee, seen here with his Who-mobile. But though others earned their share of adulation, to those early devotees, there was no one quite like the original.
While Troughton has way more of the modern Doctor in him, and Pertwee's was the most successful before Tom Baker's, that was the consensus. After this happened, the fanbase and their own ideas of who the best version was. While Tom Baker is still a popular answer, he's my favourite after all, it kind of scattered the fanbase, and I've met fans of pretty much all of them. So the idea that one would just cave in and see another version as the best is an idea that isn't popular. There is also the idea that regeneration, the Doctor basically getting a new body as a way to cheat death, and the idea of almost dying and being granted a new body and personality would be extremely traumatic, so that seeing themselves as the best is something defensive thing going on in the Doctor's head that also justifies the whole new actor thing. There's also bi-generation. However, considering how glossed over it is in the show, it's just a load of this.
What does this mean? What does this mean? Well, say something!
I'm not saying it can't be explained away, but I genuinely don't know how it's supposed to work. several years later, even after seeing it happen twice, and I've perfectly pieced together Skaro's history. More on that later when I talk about the villains. Regeneration means the old body is dead. The TARDIS is probably one of the more interesting ships in science fiction that I've encountered, just in general. It has the ability to travel anywhere in time and space, meaning that the BBC can just steal costumes and sets from their historical dramas going on at the same time and say, we're doing an episode in Victorian times now. I joke, but Classic Who is famously low budget, so that is actually possible. It also runs on technology called transdimensional engineering, which... okay, favourite Doctor of mine, take it away. If I get struck for this, I'm going to use my method of plastering the video with text because I want to take shortcuts. The audio matters though. That's the thing that matters most.
So, explain to me how this TARDIS is larger on the inside than the out.
All right, I'll show you. It's because insides and outsides are not in the same dimension. Which box is larger?
That one.
Now, which is larger?
That one.
But it looks smaller.
Well, that's because it's further away.
Exactly. If you could keep that exactly that distance away and have it here, the large one would fit inside the small one.
That's silly.
The TARDIS is also interesting because one of the things that I do have to bring up is how often in Classic Who the Doctor tries landing the thing in a specific time and place, only to miss by decades.
Can we not help them? We could use a TARDIS.
What, for a trip to the moon?
Aye.
We'd probably overshoot by a few million years.
Yes, or by a few million miles. I'm afraid the TARDIS is not suited to short-range travel.
The idea is also thrown around that the TARDIS is conscious.
You know, you have never been very reliable.
And you have?
You didn't always take me where I wanted to go.
No, but I always took you where you needed to go.
You can draw your own conclusions from whatever's going on there, but as I am trying to get people on board, I personally think that the TARDIS just sends the Doctor and company to the closest point in time or space, where whoever needs heroics gets them. The dialogue whenever people talk about the Doctor's TARDIS in the context of others, like other Time Lords, is that others are supposedly more advanced, while the Doctor is the equivalent of some random weirdo that's able to get a car from 40 odd years back working. It's why the TARDIS is a police box. They were a very real thing in the mid-20th century UK, and the idea was that the TARDIS has a feature that blends it into something that matches the time and place, so no matter where or when a Time Lord is, they'd be inconspicuous. However, it got stuck as a police box. The Doctor has repaired it a couple of times, and they've ended up hating the results, so it stays a police box. Oh, and if you haven't seen my decom video, one of the reasons why the Doctor and a companion can't stop the European slave trade, the Holocaust, just every horrible thing that happened in history is because they've already seen the consequences. It's the same with finding a dictator on another world, which is common. The Doctor can't just go back several years and kill them, because when they see the dictator is there, everything about it leading up to that moment is fixed. At least that's how I look at it. There is also a fixed point in time explanation about events like Pompeii.
It's 79 AD, 23rd of August, which makes Volcano Day tomorrow.
Plenty of time. Pick everyone out easy.
Yeah, except we're not going to.
But that's what you do. You're the Doctor. You save people.
Not this time. Pompeii is a fixed point in history. What happens, happens. There is no stopping it.
However, I honestly prefer my explanation because the Doctor also has to explain this little tidbit a few episodes later.
Listen, Doctor, if this is a time machine, that man you're chasing, why can't you just pop back to yesterday and catch him?
I can't go back inside my own timeline.
So I just did both in one go. Anyway, the reason why I'm also talking about the TARDIS is that while there are episodes where the Doctor doesn't have it and they speak perfect English, the TARDIS also is partly psychic and translate whatever languages are being spoken. So if they're in a story set in 1066, for example, they're speaking 11th century English, which supposedly sounds like this. There are also clips that I just interpret as the equivalent of the TARDIS failing to get across high concept ideas for humans that our languages just haven't worked out yet.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. Physics! Physics! Eh? Physics. 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 I don't want you getting all this down.
Yes. The canon. The last time I talked about Doctor Who continuity, I was reading off a script of a researched part of something I wrote and was stumbling over my words because of how messy it was. While Who Travels with the Doctor never gets contradicted, at least in the main show, a lot of the nuts and bolts aspect of it, beyond just the idea of the show adapting the audio dramas and books, and the audio dramas, books and comic books all adapting each other, and whether one version is canon or not, is so messy that everyone adopts a pick-and-choose policy. People online may say that it was consistent before whatever era they're currently angry at, but that has never been the case. For example, people may hate the Chris Chibnall ran era, but one of the things I absolutely love is this.
I've lived for thousands of years. So long I've lost count.
Time for more messy continuity. The Doctor drops his age as 400 in Tomb of the Cybermen, around 750 depending on what Tom Baker story you're watching, 900 years old in the Colin Baker years, and 953 in Time of the Rani. Until...
When you say 900 years...
That's my age.
You're 900 years old?
Yeah.
Okay, so the books that may be continuity but maybe aren't did backflips to try and justify this by saying that the 8th Doctor only sees himself as 3 years old despite being, I think, 1,013 years old. It genuinely doesn't matter at this point. While you may think that this is a bow on top and it all makes sense...
I'm beginning to lose confidence for the first time in my life. And that covers several thousand years.
How old the leading character is of this TV show needs a conspiracy theory board, a calculator, and several fact checkers. That's if we're taking into account that the Doctor kept track infallibly. Fans can hate the Chibnall era all they want, but that no clue clip? It's genuinely amazing to have after working through all that. To be fair, this does kind of also get frustrating. The Reality War is an episode currently getting dragged through the mud, and while I don't watch those videos because I like to form my own opinion, I did speak to fans who didn't like it because it didn't make sense, and this clip...
There's no such thing.
We're sterile.
We are infertile.
The species is barren. We're a biological dead end. There can never be another Gallifreyan child.
This is a reference to a book called Lungbarrow, which has one method of Time Lord reproduction, tries to explain why the Doctor is one of the founding members of Time Lord Society, which is something that the 80s tried, and ran away at 236 as explained in the 70s, while also tying all of this together. The episode not only doesn't explain anything beyond the clip that I played, but runs with other explanations for these things, and also constantly references Susan Foreman, the Doctor's granddaughter, which Lungbarrow transforms that into... It's complicated. The short version is that this is a broad strokes introduction, and we can be here all day. I got back to this fan after watching, and said no wonder you were lost. How is anyone, save for people like me, going to make sense of all this? If that puts you off, an advantage of being a casual fan is you can get by with watching random episodes if you like it. If only there was a quick and easy way to be told what to watch in Classic Who. Hint, hint. Now, the companions. They were conceived as the actual leading characters of the show, believe it or not. The first two were a science and history teacher, Susan's teachers, because it was conceived as an educational program before the villains. I'll get to them next, kind of hijacked the intention of the show. The idea is that the character of the Doctor, as you can imagine, is too strange and overwhelming to start off with, so An Unearthly Child and Rose, the first episodes of both Classic and New Who, do not have the Doctor as the lead character. Some companions are better than others, but the whole idea is that they're supposed to be the everyman. They fall into this fighting aliens and travelling throughout time and space, and take the offer to do so because that's an amazing opportunity. If you haven't seen the Doctor Who movie, the fact that the companion isn't the lead, the fact that it takes a half hour for the new Doctor to show up, and that it's so lore-heavy are why I don't think it worked, even if, in the grand scheme of things, Paul McGann was done dirty. I wouldn't bother with the 96 TV movie until you have a better idea of the show than this video. That's the kind of not beginner-friendly it is. There really isn't all that much to say because there is an extreme disparity between what makes a companion of Classic Who and a companion of New Who. Now, the villains. When you think Doctor Who villains, it's hard to not talk about the Daleks. Remember when I said there was a whole other layer to the Doctor killing that needs talking about? Well, the Daleks are this alien race that lives inside travel machines. They're called travel machines. After the Endless War, a war between the Daleks and the Thals. After the Endless War, a war between the Daleks and the Thals. Two species on one planet that were perpetually fighting a war that ended up with them in an irradiated wasteland and basically fueled by hatred. The Daleks are analogous to the Nazis, and because their hatred is literally the only emotion they can feel, and they spread throughout the universe, killing everything. The Doctor has attempted genocide on them often. In New Who, it's almost every series finale for the first 8 seasons. The problem with them is people complain about how once scary things like a slasher villain or something over time get put into goofier situations and lose their fear factor. The Daleks have been put through that definitively happening twice. They were so popular in the 60s they made 2 movies where the Doctor is just a scientist that invents the TARDIS in his backyard. However, I'm not really a fan of them. While the stories of Classic Who they're adapting are longer, I'd suggest watching them instead, even if it's not the best introduction. Also, not the edited down versions. I know they're faster and in colour, but if you're like me, you'll want to see how this was initially broadcast, albeit in one long marathon. However, I also have a video on Classic Who, so if you want to see which ones I'd pick for a first time watcher, go there. Again, hint hint. I also find it worth talking about because people like joking about watching Doctor Who in the order of when the stories are set. This is a horrible idea, considering how much work is needed to actually sort through these 60 years of TV and date contradictions like I outlined in my Sarah Jane Adventures Series 1 video. However, the Daleks live on the planet Skaro, and save for that comic relief special that came out a while ago, you can piece together Skaro's history pretty seamlessly. Maybe I can do a video on that after I'm done with the spin-offs. I should also mention the Thals. While they're not villains, are just a footnote save for the Daleks' first opponents. What happens to them is they turn to peace, and they do fight back in Planet of the Daleks, but that seems to be where their timeline ends. Also worth pointing out is that in Classic Who and not New Who, the Daleks are basically slave drivers because they can't do what the people they're enslaved can do. As in literally, inside they look like this. Personally, I'd love for this idea to come back. It's a subtle nod that the Master Race stuff is a bunch of crap propagated by a group of morons with anger issues and delusions of grandeur that are all definitely compensating for something. They are an allegory after all. I've seen the Cybermen as being talked about like a Borg ripoff. However, they came first in the 60s. Either that or they're seen as 2 writers' rooms coming up with the same concept. They don't adapt to whatever people are attacking them with. However, the idea was fear from artificial organs and transplants. Stuff like that. They're emotionless cyborgs chasing perfection rather than the Daleks thinking that they are perfection. They keep trying to add stuff to these guys. However, an allergy to gold, a nanobot virus, whatever the hell these things are, it never really worked, save for these little slug things that are kind of like their attack drones. I guess the idea of trying to chase perfection is also on the rise for them, so, yeah, more on this later. The Autons and the Nestine consciousness are alien-possessing plastics. What's interesting about them is that the extremely on-the-nose social commentary aside, they appeared both to introduce people to the very, very different Third Doctor's run, watch my Classic Who video for more information, and in New Who, they were the villains in Rose, so it feels like as villains, they're pretty much a go-to alien to just ease people into something new and different. I don't know whether this is intentional or not, but I think it's interesting, considering they are rarely in the show. The Sontarans are over-the-top parodies of the man up and join the military mindset, and worshipping ancient Greeks of Sparta as soldiers. They're not exactly like the Daleks, but they are fighting an endless war, and doing it so much that they need to clone more soldiers for it, or hence cloning their own soldiers over and over and over again. Their opponents are the Rootons, who have only been seen on Who once, in the horror of Fang Rock. I honestly really want them to return because the Sontarans are 50 years old and have appeared a lot, while the Rootons haven't. Swinging back to comic books, it's like reading a decade of Superman stories and Lex Luthor is only in one panel. Of the new show, the only aliens that actually stuck are the Weeping Angels. The Angels are creatures imprisoned inside stone statues that can only move when you're not looking at them. They transport their victims to a random time in the past where they feed on the future that was just lost. With that said, after the episode Blink, every addition to the Angel lore was, not great. There's the idea that if you draw a Weeping Angel, have a photo or video of them, then that is another angel. However you feel about that, and what that means being unclear, throwing that in conjunction with this... Yeah, one of the things that I have to warn people about is that Doctor Who's writing gets extremely inconsistent in terms of quality. As I said in my video on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Series 1, half of it is some of the best sci-fi TV of its day, the other half is just bad, and it can jump between those two modes from story to story. Otherwise, quite literally in some cases. As I keep explaining in my Classic Who video, that the Caves of Androzani is not just the essential 5th Doctor or 80s Doctor Who, but Doctor Who overall. The 5th dies and regenerates onto the 6th, and then we get the single worst introduction to a new Doctor in the show's history. Grappling with that is part of all this. With that said, I honestly don't think there's any complete season of either show that had a hit rate of 0 bad ones, or for that matter, 0 good ones. Some of the worst episodes of some seasons aren't as bad as others, but that doesn't mean it doesn't apply. However, when it comes to the villains that appear across both shows, there is the Renegade Time Lords. The Doctor isn't the only one who decided to screw their non-interference policy. At least until the Division stuff later. Yet, Time Lords have a very strange relationship with interfering with history. Sometimes they're shaping everything and would destroy the universe if it's not to their liking, or so strict that they execute the Second Doctor even after acknowledging that he has a point when he says this.
While you have been content merely to observe the evil in the galaxy, I have been fighting against it.
It is not we who are on trial here, Doctor, it is you.
No, of course you're above criticism, aren't you?
Also worth pointing out is that the Time Lords also sent Pertwee's incarnation on missions and has a Celestial Intervention Agency, as in CIA as well, so I guess rules for me, not for thee. The Time Lords in Classic Who were also seen as corrupt by the end, so this sort of adds up. It's just that the idea changed to just how deep it really went. However, if the Doctor is the renegade force for good in the universe, the Master is the renegade force for evil. What his deal is changes depending on whether you're watching the old or new show. The New Who depicts the Master as this over-the-top villain that was driven insane by a drum noise in his head, which, if you ask me, is actually one of the weakest retcons the show ever did. I don't really want to be all you must hate this as much as I do, quit having fun, because I think that honestly has poisoned fan culture in general. However, if humanity has created a means to stop people from hearing annoying stuff in their heads that isn't there, then the society responsible for transdimensional engineering, travelling through space and time, and a species that has low-level telepathy should have too. Plus, the Master everywhere else, even in other episodes of New Who, is best described ideologically like this.
See that couple over there? You're the puppy.
And that's it. The Master wants that dominance, that fear, whatever you can throw at this. From the species of the universe, every episode of the classic run, as well as Moffats and Chibnall's, reflects this. They're supposed to be around equals with the Doctor in terms of intelligence, so it's framed as a chess match, like Encounter, like Moriarty and Holmes, or Batman and the Joker. There are others around the Doctor's level, like the Rani and the Meddling Monk, both of which I break down in my classic video, and I wrote this before the Rani actually appeared again, as the Rani gets complicated. I like their first appearance because in that story they're basically an uncaring scientist. It's just that humans are the lab rats for whatever they're working on, or whatever species really. It's just that in every story since, they're basically the Master again, and they only agreed to team up with each other in the Rani's first appearance because the Doctor would have a problem with the experiments, and they both know it. I just feel like uncaring scientist Time Lord using sentient species as lab rats has more potential than just once. Otherwise, the other things worth talking about are the Time Lords clearly above the Doctor, depending on the story. Omega and Rassilon are two founders of Time Lord Society, and they at least helped with creating it. Rassilon is a techno-god who can't be killed, so got imprisoned in his own death zone. He is so far above the Doctor that he can turn other Time Lords into living statue busts. Theorists really should connect this with the Weeping Angels, and Rassilon, while being a despotic megalomaniac, views his own immortality as a curse. Omega got imprisoned in the singularity of a black hole and basically created a micro-universe inside it. He's desperate for an escape and a new body as he lost his old one, even if he's in there too long, and coming back to the mainline Who universe would destroy it. However, that plotline got resolved recently. I just watched the Three Doctors after going through the stories I mentioned in my Classic Who video. I also don't know where else to put this, but Doctor Who also has its own versions of cosmic gods. The Pantheon are kind of revising this idea, however I'll go through what was announced in that league beforehand. The Guardians, both white and black, are the literal personifications of good and evil, as in an endless stalemate. One can't exist without the other. The Eternals are just kind of partying, doing races in boat-themed spaceships for eternity. They just sort of want to party and have fun. The Toymaker, who returned and was confined, plays games, a bit like Q from Star Trek. However, Q doesn't have malicious intent a lot of the time. The Toymaker does. However, he is bound by the rules of the game he's playing. Okay, actually that's another retcon, but I honestly prefer it. I know that this is controversial because some people actually like the Toymaker's earlier selves in audio, books, and comics, and I do understand the quit having fun thing, I really, really do. However, the Toymaker not cheating really feels like he's bound by the games in a way that gives him limitations like Mr. Mix's Biddlick. I'm going back to comics, and if you're not a fan, his name's spelled like this. That guy has to say his name backwards to stop fooling around. Otherwise, there's The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, an 80s Who story that featured gods wanting to be entertained, and if the performers they get don't live up to their standard, they die. In the books, they also link Cthulhu to Doctor Who, so that may count. Yes, I'm not kidding. And in the Pyramids of Mars, the Doctor fights a member of the Egyptian Pantheon. And the Doctor recently said they once partied with Dionysus, so mythologies of Earth could also be a thing. There are more gods in here than in the works of Rick Riordan. There are also nightmare people in the Whittaker era. With that said, a lot of the Whittaker era for me comes down to the idea is fine, it's just that the execution isn't as good as it could have been. For the most part, who rarely dabbles in this, and I see why. I really don't like the idea of the Doctor outsmarting gods. It really makes their intelligence seem endless. They have done it, I just think sparingly, like once with the Toymaker in Series 3 and once with the Black Guardian Series 16 is better. That and it adds to them, so when they show up, it's a big deal. However, there are 2 additions to that pantheon during the Gutboy years that, if anything, reinforce what I just said. Mr. Ring-a-Ding is a rubber-hosed animation character in the real world, like in Roger Rabbit, played expertly by Alan Cumming. My problem with the episode he's in is that while the episode takes place in the 50s, they could have done some amazing Fleischer-style transformations with it. The other addition is Maestro, who sucks all the musical talent out of everyone. My problem with both episodes at the same time, ultimately, is that they're in episode 2 of the seasons, they are going for series-long arcs. What could possibly be bigger than universe rewriting cosmic gods? In his first season, it's literally another one. And in the second, it's... Okay, that leads me to talk about the differences. I briefly talked about the differences in Classic and New Who. However, the major difference between them is that New Who, if anything, likes adding arcs to every season, whereas Classic Who, you can watch most of it in whatever order you want. I covered which ones you can't watch in any order in my Classic Who video. Yeah, I'm plugging this thing a lot. Personally, I feel like Doctor Who works best when the stories are self-contained. There are good episodes that involve the arcs. The classic example people are going to throw at me is Heaven Sent from Series 9, but Series 9's arc is about everyone being scared of the hybrid. Something that maybe comes in the future, but maybe doesn't, that maybe destroys the universe, or maybe it doesn't, and something that wasn't even mentioned until 52 years in. Also, remember I said this about the time traveling in Halloween Town 4? Time travel is in this one again, and don't you think that if you can time travel, that instead of prophesizing, you can just check? Well, apparently, even the Time Lords are afraid of this and have fortune tellings on it. The people who can literally walk in one door and it's the past, and through another and it's the future, needs something predicting the future. This feels like that moment where you're playing an RPG video game and you receive a quest and you're just thinking, okay, this is something you can probably get yourself. So when I say Heaven Sent is good in spite of the arc, this is what I mean. I don't want to insult people who enjoy the new show, but most of the arcs have problems like this if you ask me. The other issue is that in terms of the series-long arcs, there are genuine outside difficulties that warped what was going to happen into something that just doesn't really make sense. I already outlined one in my Classic Who video, but apparently during COVID, the original plan was another massive series-long arc, and the end result was Flux. I defend elements of the Timnall era, but here is where that stops. I like the redesign of the Sontarans, and I like the stuff with the Weeping Angels attacking a town in the middle of nowhere. If the whole episode was just this, it'd be the best episode since their introduction. However, they do stuff like actually get the Doctor meeting a character who tortured and abused them as a science experiment and constantly erased their memories, while each time acting as a mother figure. So, okay, cool. A mother figure that's an abusive asshole that has a long history with the Doctor. I'm currently working on another video talking about this, but I'd have liked to have seen a Medusa from Soul Eater vibe. She gets killed pretty much immediately. COVID cut down the episode count, and while I do believe that at some point there may have been something to the character and the Doctor and their relationship, it feels like it's cutting down everything until it starts feeling like there are scenes missing, and that's probably because there are. It feels like a singularity of everything I don't like about the arcs of Who, except for the fact that all of time and space shouldn't be a setting that has episode 1 foreshadow the series finale, when they literally have nothing to do with each other aside from the cast. Okay, again, I don't want to come across as the quit having fun kind of defense, so I feel like the defense for these arcs is probably going to be akin to the idea that the universe is having this order to it is comforting or something. So if you enjoy this kind of thing, then go ahead. I'm just saying my piece. I also know what I said earlier, but the other big difference between Classic Who and New Who is that the Time Lords are barely used. The showrunners can't exactly agree on whether they should be alive or not. I'm in the hard no camp because, as I said in my Classic Who video, They went from being able to erase a race of people from existence with a thought to being able to be taken over by Sontarans. The first time the Time Lords were killed off was by taking a popular classic Who story, Genesis of the Daleks, and saying that that was the start of the Time War. Okay, I have to explain this. The Daleks received time travel in the Chase in Series 2 of Classic Who, so they were one of the first races aside from the Time Lords to use it. And it was even before they were name dropped. So the Doctor gets ordered to destroy or delay the Daleks from rising in Genesis of the Daleks. The Daleks, after this story, got gridlocked in a war by these one-appearance aliens that are creatures of logic. After these guys wiped out a lot of the Daleks with the virus the Creator, Davros, one of the many Doctor Who characters that just can't die, creates new Daleks which really irritated the old ones. The Daleks think they're perfection, so changing them started a civil war that ends in the 80s with the Doctor blowing up Skaro, which I already covered in my Classic Who video. So, this was their last appearance in Classic Who, so after this they turned their attention to the Time Lords and apparently everyone's dead. The Doctor's character goes through a very weird revamp. The Doctor seems to preserve life when it'd be more humane to not. This is going to get controversial, but this is an infamous episode of the David Tennant era, where he doesn't show up for a majority of it, but he does appear at the end. We follow this amateur YouTuber obsessed with the Doctor, and it ends with the Doctor keeping his love interest alive in a cement block. I'm an amateur YouTuber who does Doctor Who stuff on occasion. Being unable to move and watching my process for eternity, it's more humane to die than watch my process unable to move and thinking, oh god, looking at me is all you have to live for. This is everywhere, especially in Tennant, Whittaker and Gutler's eras. The Doctor, in trying to save a life, only makes things worse for them in a wished on a monkey's paw sort of way. This is probably because of this scene. However, I really like one of these characters to come back angrier than before.
Everybody lives, Rose. Just this once! Everybody lives!
Also, on that ending, Deus Ex Machina endings are everywhere in New Who. If you like them, that's your taste. With that said, I do feel like once in a while the show could or should swing back to this just to make those endings more powerful.
If you can't take a little bloody nose, maybe you ought to go back home and crawl under your bed. It's not safe out here. It's wondrous, with treasures to satiate desires both subtle and gross. But it's not for the timid.
That's how I see the prospect of travelling with the Doctor in general. Just a couple of endings that reinforce that to a season. As an aside to the death thing, episodes like The Star Beast has the Doctor have a breakdown because he doesn't like having to choose between his friend and London up to and including the friend's daughter, the friend's husband, the friend's mother, and pretty much everyone this friend knows. And she says she's fine with dying to save them and more. It really gives off the impression that he either never expects this after 60 years real time, or he's seriously considering watching London explode over this. This is probably more of a staple of Tennant's eras, but it's worth pointing out that, no offense, the other Doctors would be sad but not basically do that. I know that the idea is that he is such a sweet, innocent angel man that he can't witness anyone dying, but I genuinely don't think that works when 3 of the 4 Tennant finales involve him committing genocide. That's kind of the idea of what the Doctor is now, that he's a hipster nerd that's far more wanting to preserve life than the classic Doctor ever thought about being in ways that I have some problems with. The companions are also changed a lot. The intention around them in New Who really warps them to be capable of changing the universe and being special. My mindset of this is that, again, if you like it, that's fine, but the idea is that they're basically the self-insert characters being far closer to humanity than the Doctor is, even if the companions aren't human, and in Classic Who, not all of them are. I just feel like shaping and reshaping the universe is too out of reach for the 4 characters that were originally the people we were supposed to relate to. On the flip side to this, however, sometimes you get a character like Nyssa. Who is Nyssa? I have watched every story with her in it, and I don't think she has a defined character. At least not in the main show, meaning you're probably going to have to listen to audio dramas, read books, and comics in order to get a defined character. It's very pick your poison between a sometimes insufferable sense of self-importance, getting validated, or not really having a personality. that's the risks both types of companions ultimately have, so that especially is very, I'll concede, as much as I angered both sides of the which is better crowd. Also, the sonic screwdriver. Time for possibly my most controversial Who opinion. Yes, while it appears in classic Who, the sonic really is something used over and over and over again in New Who. Overused, if you ask me. I'd like to play a clip.
Drop the sonic device.
Isn't my day, is it? I feel as though you've just killed an old friend.
That was on the direct orders of the producer at the time, who believed that the sonic is a crutch for the writing team to lean on. He was, in my opinion, correct, and it only got worse in New Who. It's not just a screwdriver anymore, it's a screwdriver, a Star Trek tricorder, a magic wand, a telekinesis machine, a hacking machine, a force field generator, one of Tony Stark's computers, and can even screw around with phones so the companion can call their friends and family from across time and space. Just so many different things have been uses for the sonic that it just needs sentience and legs to make the Doctor and the companion pretty much useless. I know it's iconic, but when I first watched The Woman Who Fell to Earth, I liked this inventing scene. Like, Whittaker was going to be like Pertwee's inventing or using science to break out of Dalek prison, like Hartnell. This scene and a few others, and I really mean a few others, is the only time the Whittaker Doctor invents because only one invention matters. So it's also cannibalizing what character the Doctor had in some iterations. And that's another problem with the Chibnall years. It's clearly trying to be the sweet spot between Classic Who and New Who, and while that is a noble goal, it gets directionless and confused frequently. With that said, it's Davies who has a lot to answer for when it comes to that screwdriver having so many uses. I don't really know how to end this, except to plug my classic Doctor Who video again and where to start. If you're thinking about watching the first 7, then I'd say go there. What I did was look through the first 7 without a guide, then hone in on more on which ones I liked until I watched more and more. As I said, the writing makes it simultaneously the best and worst sci-fi TV of its day. My favourite era is Hinchcliffe and Holmes from the 70s, but that still doesn't mean I particularly like stories such as The Innovation of Time. So please bear that in mind if you decide to start watching. As I said in my Classic Who video, I am happy with telling people what stories are the bad ones, but I haven't gotten any response back for whether I should do it either way. I hope you enjoyed that. I'd like any constructive criticism, but otherwise please like it, share it, and subscribe.